This is an ode to the forgotten feminine, with love letters to and from all kinds of women. Here for the daughters carrying the world upon their spine, wherefore the silence of our grandmothers we rise. Here to remember our power and shed our doubt. Forget the bullshit the patriarchy's on about. This is an ode to the forgotten feminine, with love letters to and from all kinds of women.
You know when you're thinking about or going to tell somebody how you feel, but then the second you go to do it, your body collapses, your throat tightens, you feel the urge to run, and suddenly opening up doesn't feel safe. It feels like a threat. Welcome to the first official episode of the Letters to and from Women podcast. My name is Mariana. I'm your host, somatic attachment coach, and founder of The Enlightened Woman. And I'm excited because today's conversation just feels especially important and dear to me because vulnerability isn't only something I love talking about, it's something that I love encouraging and teaching women how to do better, because not only does it determine the quality of our personal relationships, it completely influences the ever-evolving depth of connection that we have with ourselves as well. Vulnerability is such an intricate and intimate thing to navigate because every time we engage with vulnerability, it rattles some very competing, contradicting, and painful parts of our identity and asks us to see beyond all of it. I know for me personally, when I first started learning about vulnerability from experts like Brené Brown, I was like, oh, this is so cute. I can do this. I feel like an open book. I know I can talk about my past and how I feel, and it sounds real sweet in practice. But the more that I've engaged with it in my relationships, particularly my romantic relationships, I've learned that vulnerability is actually a lot more difficult because it's not something passive. It's a conscious choice on our part. It's a conscious decision to own the truth of your experience and be witnessed in the imperfection that you arrive to that experience with. I'm going to say that one more time. Vulnerability is a conscious decision to own the truth of your experience and be witnessed in the imperfection that you arrive to your experiences with. It's a choice that we make for ourselves, and it's also a choice that we make as an ode and surrender to the people we love and to the sanctuary that is our relationships. And I want to tell you a bit about what my journey has been like with vulnerability, and it feels like the right way to do so with a story that happened recently in my life. So my partner, Reese, who you'll likely be hearing about a lot on this podcast, we've been together for just over a year. And last month, for our 1 year anniversary, we went to a really small town on Vancouver Island because we love the island. I went to school for 5 years there. I run back there whenever I get the chance. And it just felt like the right thing to do to get away and just be in nature for this very fun and sacred time. I had chosen the place, I had chosen the Airbnb, I'd made us this whole itinerary so that he could see the island in a way he's never seen it before. And so we go to this small town, and let's just say it was not what I had hoped it would live up to. It was like one thing after another. We went there on the weekend, and on the Sunday we were there, everything was closed. There was really nothing to do. The weather was very icky, so we couldn't go outside too much. And because I had unknowingly walked into this experience with all these expectations of how I wanted to go and how I wanted it to leave a lasting impression on him and the feeling that I wanted to have all throughout the experience, every time I perceived that something was not up to that standard, which nobody put on me but myself, I was having a meltdown inside. And I kept compensating for feeling guilty about the fact that I had to live up to the standard by trying to quickly figure out other things to do on the fly and apologizing, even though he was telling me that he was having a great time and we could just go with the flow. When I look back on that, really everything was fine, but I was triggered by the part inside me that was afraid to be seen as stupid and incapable. And I kept noticing that even when he would tell me that everything was fine and he was totally fine to just do what came up on the fly, there was a voice in my head that would counteract that and say, I don't believe him. He's probably lying just to be nice. And I kept reinforcing that very pressure for perfection on myself, to the degree that on the last day of our trip, we were going to the ferry to come back home. And because I didn't read the ticket properly for our reservation, I Google Maps us to the wrong ferry terminal. So we get to the ferry terminal, and the lady at the counter is like, you're at the wrong one. People do this all the time. Just take a 20-minute drive, plug this one into your GPS, and you'll get there no problem. So we turn around, and my boyfriend's having a giggle because I often take us on detour because I'm not paying attention to the map. I start to yap. And next thing you know, even though everything was fine and we were going to get to the other ferry in time, I break down crying. Because that was it. It was like, now you've seen how dumb I am, now you've seen how incapable I am, I just inconvenienced us, and I'm crying, and he's like, whoa, what's going on? And I was crying, and instead of making the effort to reconnect and explain what was going on for me, I caved in, I completely shut down, I went silent, because now the story that had been reinforced to me from my whole life that I was stupid and incapable, he was seeing in my eyes. And so when we actually got to the proper ferry terminal, I got on the ferry, I went onto the sun deck, I took some space, I let myself really confront and digest and feel through those narratives that were coming up, what my body was experiencing. And what I realized is that I was hiding because I didn't want him to see how I saw myself. And confronting that that is actually how I saw myself and I was projecting that onto him was a very sad and confronting realization. And the story has a happy ending because after I took some space and I realized that, I went back downstairs and I like pulled my chapstick and my wallet and my coins out of my purse, and I made those into characters that I then explained the situation through, like, this is me and this is you, and this coin is what happens when I'm triggered. And it was really cute and it had a really happy ending. But what that experience taught me was that being vulnerable means being honest about the experiences that shaped how we see ourselves, and it forces us to lean into seeing ourselves beyond those labels and through the eyes of another person. And so my goal for this episode is to teach you why vulnerability feels so unsafe in your body, what your fear of vulnerability reveals about how you see yourself, and how to learn to feel safe in vulnerability to deepen the intimacy and love between you and the people that you love. And the first thing I want to start off with to do that is invite you to release some shame and guilt, because I think that it's a very common misconception that if you don't feel that you're good at being vulnerable, it's because you're a bad communicator or because you're avoidant. And of course, there's nuance and there's pieces of that that can be worked on. But this is an incomplete assumption because survival instincts like fighting, freezing, fleeing, shutting down in vulnerability happens because those responses are there to protect us from a perceived threat. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the threat that we are perceiving? So let me be perhaps the first to tell you that that threat that we perceive in vulnerability is that vulnerability forces us to act in ways that opposes the set identity beliefs that we have about ourselves. And what I mean by identity beliefs, especially as women, is that we were raised to uphold this very set, pristine, pure idea of what makes a desirable woman, right? She's a woman who is low maintenance. She doesn't need too much. She doesn't brag or complain about too much. She's not very up and down with her emotions. Like, it's a very monotone, polished ceramic porcelain doll idea of what makes a valuable, loving, and acceptable woman, right? We might have learned in childhood that when we expressed our feelings, we were rejected, or we were told that we were too much, or we were sent to our room because it wasn't appropriate to feel certain things. And so this teaches our brain and body that we had to adopt and uphold a certain way of moving through the world, an identity, to be safe and acceptable. And so when we're in vulnerability and we're deep in those triggers and we're feeling the anxiety about those triggers, it's because now we're letting that person into that experience. And if we can't uphold that identity, it's super dysregulating when we've never lived outside of that. So there's that piece about holding all of those parts of ourselves in vulnerability. But this other piece is something I never hear spoken about. And I think it's what adds a layer of complexity to vulnerability, which is that when we are navigating vulnerability, we are actively dismantling the projections that we have about how we think other people will receive us in vulnerability. And I want you to really take that in, because at the same time that your brain is trying to uphold this set identity about how incapable or unworthy you are, it's also predicting that that other person is going to reject you or not love you once you let them in. And that, more often than not, I think, is untrue. Because again, if we learn that we were going to be rejected or told that we were too much after sharing these pieces of ourselves, then vulnerability automatically becomes a bargain to see if that person is or is not going to do the same in the present moment. And dismantling these projections about ourselves and others is what shifts us out of survival mode and into seeing situations and the people we love for who they really are beyond their wounds. And the same is true for how we learn to see ourselves through vulnerability, literally forcing us into a new identity and way of seeing ourselves beyond our hurt and our pain. And that is why I love teaching people how to embrace vulnerability. And let me just take a quick pause to encourage you to pause the podcast if anything has landed with you so far, to go back and re-listen to some things if you need to take some notes, but also to tell you that if the conversation is resonating with you so far and you really want to learn how to shift out of survival mode in relationships and how you feel within yourself and the world, this is the kind of work that I am facilitating in my sisterhood called Belong, which is a space that I created for women who are passionate and ambitious, but struggling with the impacts of complex trauma and learning how to shift out of survival patterns in life and love. So if joining our community is something that is of interest to you, I am going to link the link to how to join us inside Belong in the show notes. You'll get access to the 2 to 3 hours of sessions that we do every month, from live somatic healing sessions to meditations to all of the conversations that are going on in our forum all month long. So I would absolutely love to have you in there, and I highly encourage that you click that link after you finish this episode. So now that I've taught you about why vulnerability feels so unsafe in your body, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite frameworks that I practice in my own relationship, but that I also teach my clients. And my hope is that you go into this exercise with the understanding that when we're practicing sitting in vulnerability, it is about increasing our capacity to hold our wounds and see past them as they're triggering us. Because what tends to happen in those vulnerable conversations is that we're having all of these things from our past come up about why vulnerability wasn't safe, and we're seeing the some of the darkest shadow parts of ourselves come out and scream at us about how unworthy or unlovable we are. But when we learn to stay grounded in the midst of all of that chaos and have a North Star that can guide us out of that very thick fog, because it really feels like that sometimes, you're able to create a space for those emotions to kind of get aired out and lose the grip that they have on how you show up to situations and how you give trust to the person that you're in dialogue with. So, the framework that I want to introduce you to is my "this is what's here, but" exercise. So, the next time that you go into a vulnerable conversation, this is the exact script that I want you to use. I want you to say, "This is what's coming up for me right now." And then you'll name, "I really want to run," or "I really want to shut down," whatever that blank is for you. And then you're going to say, "But I really want to," and then state your desired outcome for that conversation. "But I really want to understand you better. I really want to learn to see past these triggers to feel more connected to you." Now, why this exercise is so powerful is because, for starters, naming the anxiety when you say, "This is what's coming up for me right now," just lets it get aired out. And so often, when we hold that anxiety inside, we're also holding the shame that's attached to it. And I believe that if we are walking into a conversation with all of those triggers taking a hold of us in that moment, it's also important for the other person to have context about what's coming up for us, so that if we react in a certain way or if we need space, they can have the context to understand why we're making that request or why we're acting from that place in that moment. But also, having a North Star with a set of desirable outcomes really helps us to move towards a tangible goal for these conversations, because so often when we're triggered and our defenses and our ego get bruised, it can be really easy to shift into unhealthy patterns like proving who's right or pointing fingers and blaming. And so having that predetermined set of outcomes not only becomes a guiding post for your emotions, but it also lets that person know what your intentions are for that conversation. And it helps them feel grounded in knowing that what you really want is to connect with them and to problem solve. For me personally, some of the values that I uphold and enter into conversations with are the following: understanding my person better instead of trying to see who's really right, understanding my person's triggers and their overall experience better to be a better partner, friend, or daughter or sibling, understand how I can be a better support system with this new information about them, understand my blind spots about what perspective or what angle I couldn't see the situation from before, learning to see past my survival brain and my survival instincts, feel closer and more connected with my person, and overall just increase our propensity to sit in discomfort together. And I've just found that navigating difficult conversations with these North Stars helps me anchor in the love and the choice that we are both making to choose vulnerability and to choose it to see each other better and to get past these issues that a lot of the time don't end up being that deep. It's just that our wounds make them feel a lot deeper than they actually are. Now, if you're feeling that it's still really dysregulating to say that script and sit in conversation with that, it's totally fine to take some space to calm down, let yourself reconnect to the present moment in the ways that you do so before entering that conversation, and make a promise to that person and to yourself to come back into connection. Sometimes it really just takes ourselves witnessing ourselves first to then feel safe entering conversation with those parts of us holding space. And ultimately, if you know that you need that space to walk into conversation more regulated and more ready for repair, you're also doing a labor of love for that person too. Now, if you're out for a walk or you have the capacity to pause the episode here, I want you to invite yourself to think about the last time you were in a situation where those wounds came up for you and you shut down and vulnerability felt really scary. And I want you to use that script of, this is what's coming up for me right now, but, and think about how you would have wanted to approach that situation differently. And if you can't pause the episode right now, I want to invite you to leave it as an exercise for later. Because I think that even though we can't amend the past, going back and reflecting on how we actually would have wanted to show up creates better outcomes for the future. That is all I have for you today. My hope is that you walked out of this conversation with a lot more information about why vulnerability can feel so scary, and hopefully it reduced a lot of the shame and guilt that you might have about how you show up in moments of vulnerability. And I just hope that you feel inspired by the capacity that vulnerability has to help you see outside of survival mode, and the power that it has on creating more intimacy and love in your intimate relationships. Remember, you're not too broken or too much. You're just learning to discover yourself and others outside of what you've been taught keeps you safe. And shifting out of the focus of surviving and into the focus of being authentic is one of the most profound journeys that we can take as human beings. And again, as I said earlier, if you are looking for a space to learn how to shift your body, mind, and heart out of survival and into truth and authenticity, please head to the show notes after this episode to get your 30-day trial inside my Sisterhood Belong and join our beautiful community of women who are committed to healing into their most aligned and authentic self. If you like this episode and you know somebody who might benefit from this, whether it's your partner or your mom or your sibling or your best friend, please make sure to send them the link. For more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe to the episode or to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.